Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our webinar, Social Media as a Research Tool. We're very pleased to have Michael Zoorob today, who is representing Meta. He's a Research Advancement Manager at Meta since this January. And he actually has a background in the social sciences and has a PhD in government from Harvard, focusing on American politics, crime, and health. So Michael understands research and kind of what we might care about as academics, but you now have the hat as working at Meta. And the talk today is how we can use the advertisement on the different platforms that Meta offers for our research purposes. So Michael is here to kind of explain us a bit better how things work, and then I'm sure that there's also some interest in people having experience in using Meta and the advertisements. And then I'm sure there will be quite a few questions. So do keep the questions coming. As always, we would prefer you to use the Q&A function that you find at the bottom of the Zoom screen here. There might be some question that Michael answers on the way, but we will have enough time at the end to answer like bigger questions and come back to some issues to go into more depth if the audience wishes to do so. But with no further ado, Michael, the floor is yours. Do you have some slides that you want to share, or?
Yeah, I'm gonna share some slides, but first let me just thank you both for inviting me. This is in some ways coming full circle. When I started this job, I was trying to figure out how researchers actually use our products and stumbled on this webinar, and now I'm finding myself presenting at it. So it's a really exciting opportunity for me to share some tips and some opportunities to get help if you're using our ads product. So I'm sharing my slides now. Also, I'm going to mention this a lot, but my email is here. It's mzoorob@fb.com or at meta.com. They both get to me. It's very helpful to hear from researchers. It's probably how I've learned the most about the actual issues people experience. And, I strongly recommend you reach out if you have specific questions. I might not be able to help right away. I may be able to, but I may not. But in any case, it's very helpful to get that feedback to know where the problems are, so we know where to invest our time. So a little brief introduction. As Anya mentioned, I'm a political scientist by background, and I joined Meta in January. I'm on our research partnerships team. This is the same team as Christina Fan and Anik Wong, who presented at the webinar series in the spring. So I won't kind of belabor all the things the team does, but broadly, we spend a lot of time supporting data products that Meta provides for researchers, like the ad library, which is a way to look at public SEEP ads, so social issue, politics, and elections ads, and the creatives for those ads and the content of those ads and the amount of impressions they got on the platform. The ad targeting data set, which is like what advertisers of SEEP ads selected as far as who they wanted to see those ads, and also the URL shares data set, which is a data set of the URLs shared on Facebook and the views on those URLs. But our team's increasingly supporting researchers who use ads, in part, I think, because of a simple sizing exercise that I'll describe partially in a moment, that there's a huge community of researchers who are using the actual advertising products that Meta sells, not intended for academics, but intended for all kinds of advertisers, but that have a lot of capabilities that have been super helpful for academics trying to reach audiences that are otherwise too expensive or just impossible to reach. And so we're, starting to do trainings like this one, and I'll describe another one in a moment. Logistical support, like helping researchers who have issues with their ad accounts. I'll also describe this later in the talk, and hopefully a lot of other programs that I'm not yet in a position to talk publicly about, but we're definitely thinking about other ways that we can support researchers, and I'm excited to share those with you in the coming months if they come to fruition. So that's a bit about me and the team. Like I mentioned, one of the things we started to do is certain kinds of trainings. And last month, we had a person from an advertising agency. Her name is Elise Connors from the agency New Engine, kind of describe at a tactical level, how to use the Meta Ads Manager. So this is, a very helpful description of the tools of the Ads Manager and the different options. So it's a very efficient talk in the sense that if you come from not knowing anything about the Ads Manager, you'll know about what all the different terms are and the different targeting options and things like this. This is a bit different from the talk that I'll give, which is a bit higher level and policy focused. But to see this talk, you can use this URL alias fb.me/researcher tutorial. And the alias will take you to the video. And if you have any problems getting it, just reach out, but that should be it. The only other thing I'd like to plug, since I'm probably in the most efficient space in the world for doing it, is that along with a couple of folks at DASIS, Stefan Pochta and Bernd Weiss, I am co-hosting a session at the European Survey Research Association conference called Social Media Ads as a Tool for Targeted Survey Sampling. So this is going to be really cool. I think it'll be a nice opportunity to meet other folks who are using Facebook ads to survey populations who are otherwise impossible to reach because typical survey companies simply don't include them in their sampling frames. So like employees of particular companies or due to migration, people who are very hard to survey because they're very mobile. So groups like this that social media is uniquely situated to reach. This is really Stefan's idea, but I hit submit, so I'm listed as coordinator 1, and we all worked on the abstract, but it should be really exciting. The abstract submissions are due in December, and it happens to be in Milan in July, so that should be nice as well. That's all the housekeeping. The sort of agenda for my bit of this talk, and I'm really excited to hear your questions throughout or at the end. Is first to size and describe the use of meta ads for research. So how many, approximately how much research output is driven by this tool and for what use cases. And then talk about some tips for a smooth experience using meta ads for research. So I'm going to talk about some ads policies that I've seen cause trouble for academics because they didn't comply with them and it caused them to have some issues with the platform. And so there are things you can do to reduce the risk of that happening. And I'm going to go over those. And also just talk about the role of platform history and why that's important for advertisers and how you can incorporate that into your workflow to reduce the risk of having an interrupted experience. And then finally, just a very practical stuff. If you do have problems, how do you get help? I'm going to talk about 3 channels for getting help. The third one is contacting my team. And it's, specifically for supporting researchers who have issues with the ads platform, logistical issues in particular. And so I'm excited to share that with you. So first, just trying to size the scholarship with meta ads. So if you use Google Scholar, it's actually pretty clear that this is a huge use case. So here I'm just using some simple terms about Facebook ads and advertising and Instagram ads and advertising co-appearing with words about survey sampling or experiments. And you find something on the order of 16,000. I think if I did this today and it's like 16,500 or so. Obviously not every one of these papers with these terms occurring together is exactly a paper in which the researcher purchases Facebook or Instagram ads for these purposes. But I've done some hand auditing of the first several pages, and early in the search terms, it's almost universal. And even if you apply a pretty strict discount, like suppose 50% of these do not fall into the use cases described, that's still 8,000 research outputs, which is not trivial for something that is not that did not exist 20 years ago. So this is certainly a common use case. If you have more, if you can think of more sophisticated or better ways to think about quantifying this research output, I'd love to hear it. But just as a first exercise, it's very clear that this is a huge research output, and particularly when compared against some of the other data products that we offer, which are also driving a lot of important work. But this is a huge one, basically. So if you look at this by year, it's increasing. I mean, in some ways, this is not too surprising, but there's growth in the number of Google Scholar counts of outputs by year. This is simply, constraining the search that I described in the previous slide to each calendar year and then plotting those. So as you can see, it is it's a growing thing, and it's growing pretty quickly. To describe some different use cases, I mean, I think if you're familiar with the webinar, you've probably seen a lot of this already, because some of the initial webinars were quite actually about how to use Facebook or Instagram advertising for these particular use cases. But to give a broad overview, participant recruitment is certainly the dominant way that the platform, that the ads are used. So surveys or survey experiments are an extremely common way that people use Facebook and Instagram ads. Facebook and Instagram ads have a lot of advantages in certain use cases, like I described on the conference slide. For example, there are some populations, like employees of particular companies, who are otherwise it's not obvious how to survey them. There are also geographies like remote islands or certain countries where survey companies simply don't exist. And so this provides an alternative way to reach people. There's also temporal constraints. One really interesting thing I've heard about is that sometimes in authoritarian countries, it's sort of very difficult to persuade a conventional survey company to run surveys on certain topics, but or it's just not logistically feasible to run the survey quickly enough. But if you have IRB approval, you can use a Qualtrics survey and share it on Facebook pretty quickly and get responses quite quickly. So there's also temporal advantages. So there are a lot of reasons why people might use surveys. I mean, another simply is cost, that particularly in middle and low income countries, the cost of recruiting participants using Facebook and Instagram ads is so cheap relative to conventional survey methods that it just enables a lot of research that otherwise couldn't happen. That said, people definitely use Facebook and Instagram ads to survey populations in rich countries. Healthcare employees, for example, is one study that Stefan Pachka, my co-organizer of the session, surveyed in rich countries during the height of the COVID pandemic using Facebook ads. And there are a lot of use cases like this. There are also use cases, maybe less familiar to the social sciences, but they definitely exist. So clinical trials, of course, advertise using social media ads. And although it's not a common use case, I'm aware of a few instances in which people use social media ads to reach people, not for, surveys typically understood, but actual qualitative interviews, which is a really interesting mix of methods. If you want to interview, migrants or workers in a particular industry, this is one way to reach those people and engage them, to ask if they want to participate in an interview. I guess one meta point, one annoying thing about the company is you say things like this, and it sounds like you're referring to the company, but what I mean to say is one higher level point that I'd like to share is that about all these use cases, one thing that's advantageous from the company's perspective is that this is explicitly consented research, that this is a way that people use our products to do research. But the participants in these studies are clearly consenting. They click on the ad for the study and they see the consent form and they hit agree. And that's a way in which I think this use case is appealing to folks at Meta, is because it's low risk. We're in the business of selling ads. We have systems for monitoring ads. And this is a way that we can help academics where they're collecting data, but it's not on our platform typically. It's off the platform. And it's with user consent. And so those are advantageous features from the company's perspective. Another use case that people use at Meta, I think it's quite a bit less, as I'll describe in terms of number, as I'll describe in a moment, but it's also very important, and the webinar touched on, is that people use social media ads to conduct field experiments, where you're sort of having an real world exposure to some kind of message embedded in an ad. And you can use that to study the efficacy of different messages. On-platform outcomes are one kind of field experiment that people run. So by this, I mean, they run different kinds of ads, and then they look at which ads created the most interest on the platform or engagement on the platform. So things like likes or shares or link clicks. So I've seen some projects that use different messages about charitable giving, and then see whether the folks who, whether those kinds of messages influence engagement with the ad or actual charitable giving through Facebook's donations systems. There's also off-platform outcomes, which I believe Florian talked a bit about at this webinar in the past. But basically, in this case, what people typically do is they take some ecological unit, like a zip code, and they randomly assign some zip codes to see ads and some zip codes not to see ads, and then see if it affects some behavior measured externally. So things like donations to a charity or vote shares. There's definitely some papers that do that. So these are all common use cases that I've seen and that get published in journals. I see that there's a QA tool. What would be the best way to export on-platform outcomes, especially comments on the ads? So comments are interesting. In general, we don't recommend. I would want you to read the terms of service more carefully before I say too much here, but we don't recommend taking comments and putting them in a spreadsheet. And part of the reason why is that if a user deletes the comment, you will still have retained it even after they've decided they no longer want you to have it. So I think number of comments, things like that are probably fine. They're certainly not identifiable or have any privacy risk. I think hand coding is probably the best way to go about this, because the terms of service explicitly prohibit systematic scraping of content. So I would definitely, you should not do that. So I would, I would recommend basically reading through the comments and hand coding them according to whatever qualitative indicators of interest to you. In general, you're not going to be getting thousands of comments on ads, so I don't think it really lends itself to systematic text analysis, but certainly you can hand code features of the ads, like whether the ad was about a particular topic or something about this. But yeah, so I hope that's helpful, and it's certainly a good question, something that comes up. And yeah, like I said, feel free to follow up by email if there's more you'd like to say about that. One final thing on this slide I'd like to mention is that recently we've seen a lot of researchers use chatbots to administer surveys, or in some cases even to administer survey experiments, which is pretty interesting. So here, what people do is they use Facebook ads that are clicked to Messenger. So if a user clicks on the ad, they are entered into a Messenger conversation or a WhatsApp conversation with the page running the ad, so the researcher's page. And there are third-party apps that make this pretty streamlined, where basically you can program a chatbot to ask the user questions within the Messenger or WhatsApp chat, and then store those results, the results of those questions as a survey. And it's a new development. It's pretty interesting. It makes a lot of sense in contexts where people's access to internet is very limited. And so they're unlikely to go to a Qualtrics survey because their data on their mobile phone allows them to use social media apps, but is very limited with respect to airtime off platform. So that's definitely one really interesting direction that people are taking. I haven't seen a lot of those papers published just yet. I can think of one using WhatsApp to study misinformation in Zimbabwe, but using WhatsApp to study the exposure to help true information about COVID and see whether it changes people's attitudes in Zimbabwe that uses click to messenger ads and WhatsApp chatbots. But this is definitely a new stream of research we're starting to see. What's the best way to track survey ads? So if I wanted to analyze which of several ads the user sees and interacts with to take my survey, what's the best way to do this? So I would use, I think the acronym is UTM codes. So basically there are ways to code, there are ways to change the URL that people So when people click on their ad and then go to your website, like a Qualtrics website, you're able to see what link they clicked on to get to your survey. And if you use a UTM code for each distinct ad, you can see which ad it was that they engaged with. Akert, I saw you undid your camera, so maybe you want to say something.
Yeah, let me jump. As you have said, you are right. Like it is very easy to do actually that when you are creating the advertisement on Facebook. At the very bottom, you will see a track, a box that lets you to add codes to the end of your URL or the URL that will carry the social media user to Qualtrics. So when you are creating the advertisement, you can easily do that through Facebook Advertisement Manager and Qualtrics. Then you should add that one to Qualtrics as an embedded code. And if you go to our handbook, we also explain that in more detail, how to do that in more detail. You can find the handbook in our website.
That's awesome. So you can get the full laydown on how to implement that code in the really great handbook that Anya and Akert put together on using Facebook ads for participant recruitment. Oh, trying to get to the next slide. So just showing, by use case, this is really just to show that surveys are the predominant use case, but field experiments are another common one. I wasn't really sure what other objects or keywords to include here, but just wanted to show that differential, and just to show that if you zoom in only on field experiments, it's not the case that this, the y-axis in the other graph makes it hard to see, but in fact, the use of research outputs using both the terms Facebook and Instagram ads and field experiments is also growing quite a lot. So there's a lot of interesting work using ads in this way as well. So some big takeaways here. So there's a large and growing research output using meta ads, hence webinars like these, which are both a response to that and a cause of that. The vast majority of research uses ads for participant recruitment, but field experiments are also growing. I'd be really curious to know what else, what other kinds of information would be helpful. So please let me know in the Q&A or reach out. The second thing that I wanted to cover in this talk are some tips for a smooth experience using the Facebook Ads Manager system. So one big thing to keep in mind is that there are ad policies governing the content of ads that run on the platform. So ads are reviewed, both the ad creatives are reviewed for policy compliance. That is the text and images that appear on the platform, as well as the landing pages. So if a user clicks on an ad, and the page that they're directed to is called the landing page, and both the ad creative and the landing page are reviewed for compliance with meta advertising policies. I think these were recently renamed advertising standards, but it's the same thing, just if you happen to see that. You should really review these, in depth, I think, at least, the titles of them. I think the vast majority are not going to be any particular issue for academics, but there are a few that I wanted to call out where I've seen a lot of academics find themselves getting into trouble. So the first is the social issue, elections, or politics advertising policy. This is a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, it's kind of been rolled out across countries over time. And so now we're at a point where most countries are covered by this policy. But this is basically a policy that requires authorization and some additional transparency about ads that are about social issues, elections, or politics. So you need to confirm your identity and that you're a national of a country where you're running a SEEP ad in order to run a SEEP ad, and it runs with a paid by disclaimer. So it shows on the ad who is paying for it. This is a way to promote transparency because often people want to know who is running ads that appear to be attempting to influence attitudes on social issues or about elections. And also, I think there's probably some laws requiring some degree of this disclosure also, at least in some countries where Meta operates. So this policy exists. I think a really important thing to keep in mind is how Meta identifies or thinks about what a social issue, election, or politics ad is. The definition is pretty broad, and the website, there's a Meta website that actually provides examples of what this might look like. So examples of creatives that fall under this category and that require this kind of authorization and paid by disclaimer to run. I've seen academics get into trouble in ways that are very preventable. For example, a survey ad that did not need to explicitly contain political content, but which used political imagery. So for example, in the United States, the major political parties have symbols like a donkey representing the Democratic Party and an elephant representing the Republican Party. And if your ad includes a picture like this, it's likely to be flagged as an unauthorized SEEP ad if you didn't go through this process and then be taken down. And this causes a lot of friction. If this happens a lot, Facebook might even disable your ability to advertise. So it's something to keep in mind. To some extent, if you want my take on whether I think something's likely to require this authorization, you can feel free to reach out, but I'd recommend using that sparingly. I have seen this, academics get into trouble with this, so I just ask that you be mindful of it. Certain words, particularly words about elections, voting, elections, presidents, things like this, are very likely to cause SEEP flags. And so if you are interested in running ads like this, you need to go through the SEEP authorization process. And academics do this, by the way. There's a working paper by Jose Ramon Enrique, who's a graduate student at Harvard, one of my former colleagues when I was a graduate student there, along with John Marshall and Horacio Larragay and perhaps another co-author. I can't quite remember, but they basically run an ad campaign in Mexico where they partner with an NGO to show video ads about exposure to, or basically telling people in the area how much misappropriation of spending is happening in their municipality, something to this effect. And of course, they went through the SEEP process and they got IRB approval to run a study like this, and they did it. So it's definitely possible. I just, there are cases where you have to do this because of what you're trying to study. And so you have to go through this process. And then there are cases where researchers, I think, if they are careful in the language they use, they won't be running SEEP ads and they won't have to go through this process for their use case. And often that can be very advantageous because, the process to run SEEP ads is in some ways very constraining. You have to be physically present in the country you're running ads. You have to be a national of that country. There are, it's definitely the area where I've seen social scientists in particular get into trouble, and it's something to be aware of. A couple of other issues that I've seen come up that I wanted to let you know about are non-existent functionality violations. So basically, if you have a picture in an ad of a function that doesn't work, your ad is likely to get flagged and taken down. So one example I've seen here are images with a like button. So the image suggests that a person would be able to click on the like button and something would happen, but in fact, clicking on the button would take the person to the researcher's site. Facebook will take down ads like this because they promote a bad user experience. Basically, they give the user the suggestion that, there's a functionality on the page, and then the user clicks on it and they end up on a different website. And so that's something where I've seen people get into trouble. I've on one occasion learned of a researcher who got into trouble because their landing page redirected people differentially based on what country they were coming from. And that's a pretty unusual situation, but basically Facebook was seeing a blank page when it was trying to view the ad from the United States, is my understanding. And so it assumed that there was not a real landing page and took the ad down. So if you happen to be considering something like that, I would keep that in mind. And then housing, employment, and credit, I just wanted to mention this, that if you happen to be running ads that are about these topics, like are offering employment, credit, or housing, there are a lot of restrictions on the targeting you can use. This is in order to prevent discrimination. And so, you're asked to just, flag your ad as such that it is one of these categories before running. And if you do, it will limit your targeting options. If you don't, and Facebook is thinking you are running an ad like this, it will likely take the ad down. I have on some occasions seen ads that are not in this category flagged in this category. These are typically academic ads offering like a really tiny amount of compensation for taking a survey. And these kinds of false positives happen, and these are cases where you can appeal in various ways, as I'll discuss in a bit. And often where my team can be helpful is in these kinds of false positive flags. I see there are some QAs, so I'm going to have a look at them now. Both are basically, how long does a SEEP approval process take? I'm not intimately familiar with this detail here, but my sense is about a month. I see you might have some specific information, but that's my sense.
No, I think you are right. It is actually it is up to 1 month, and it takes a lot of time, but it's not always an easy process. I wanted to ask you your own experiences as well in different countries, because for me, for example, getting an approval in Turkey was like, it didn't work at all. I could not confirm my identity in Turkey. So what are your experiences here? Like, so you told that it worked in Mexico. Does it work in other countries as well?
I mean, people are running thousands of these ads, right? Like the ad library and ad targeting data set exclusively consist of ads like this. I think a situation that you've described where, you're asked to basically take a picture of your passport or something like this, and then Facebook says, we don't recognize your passport. Those are the kinds of cases where if it doesn't work after a couple of times, I think it makes sense to reach out to my team and we can see what we can do. Yeah, people are doing this. It's definitely the kind of thing that,
thank you,
is happening. But yeah. Okay, so I see mindful of time. Let me keep going. So some general tips here. One kind of broad point I'd like to make about a smooth experience is that history is really important to the way Facebook advertising enforcement works. So it's helpful to make assets ahead of time. Sometimes I think academics behave in ways, I mean, unintentionally, obviously, but that really look kind of suspicious to Meta, which is that they make a brand new page with no history, no followers. Then they immediately upload a credit card and start spending. And then sometimes their ads are like about social issues. And so these are like a series of flags. So it's just a couple of things to keep in mind. It's helpful to make assets ahead of time. So, the academic workflow is long, and the time between you have a study idea and you're running the ads is probably a few months. And I think it makes sense to make your Facebook assets at the earlier end of that process, and also add, some content to your page. In part, I think this is not just important algorithmically, but also like for users who see your ads. If the ads look like they're coming from something more legitimate looking, like a more legitimate looking entity, people are more likely to trust them. When possible, you can reuse assets across studies. But what I mean here is like, if you have a Facebook page that you use for a lot of different studies, this can be helpful because it accumulates history. It also is helpful with ad accounts because some features are limited when you first start. So like your daily spend limit is capped at a pretty low level when you first start advertising. And this can sometimes cause trouble for academics when they're trying to spend a lot in a narrow period of time, like a narrow window of time. So, if you start early and you schedule ads ahead of time, you can mitigate some of these problems. But of course, if there's a crisis situation and you really need help, again, this is a situation where you might be beneficial to reach out to my team. But if you are proactive, you can often prevent these kinds of issues from happening in the first place. Is a history, even though they need to use a different Facebook page? Yeah, I mean, I think you can definitely still use the same ad account, even if you're using different pages. That's like a very common thing to do. And page history is important, but obviously, like you've described, sometimes, it doesn't make sense to use only a single Facebook page. But if you use the same ad account, that can be helpful. I would just also say, again, it's generally better to make a Facebook page and have a bit of time between then and running ads, and not to make the page and immediately start running ads when there's essentially no content on the page. I mean, it works, people do it all the time, but to use the way academics would describe this, as the system is Bayesian. And if as you accumulate history, you're perceived as less risky, and assuming that your history is non-policy violating. And so, you get access to more features, and the algorithm can be a bit kinder. At least that's how people describe it. Is the ad performance related to previous campaigns? Generally, no, not in any direct way. I mean, I think in practice, how to say this, some people are more effective advertisers than others. So there might be a correlation, but there's no reason to think that those things are causally connected. The only caveat to that I would say is that if you previously ran policy violating content in the past, then in subsequent times you run ads, your account might be perceived as more risky. But this shouldn't really affect performance, but it might affect, for example, how much you're allowed to spend, at least initially. So that's the way in which previous campaigns could influence subsequent ones, is if you have a history of policy violating content. I mean, it could be a false positive, but like a history of, according to Facebook, policy violating content, these kinds of issues can emerge. So the third thing I wanted to talk about is how to get help. And so I'm going to talk about three kinds of ways to get help if you encounter issues with Facebook ads. So here I'm mostly thinking about logistical issues where things are, either your account is, in your view, falsely flagged for a policy violation, or there's some feature that you believe you're doing everything right to access. So the example Aikut described is pretty a good example of this. I'm trying to verify my identity to access SEEP authorization. I took a picture of my passport, and Facebook just said, no, we don't recognize this passport, and you're just blocked. So these are the kinds of things that we often can help with. We have more familiarity with appealing issues with disapproved ads or ad accounts that the researcher and us, and often human reviewers at Facebook, think are false positives than we do with the passport stuff. But I suspect we could figure out who at the company could help with that. So these are the kinds of issues that we're most equipped to help with. We are not at this point equipped to help with research design or things like this. So I'd ask that you not use the form, the third thing here, to ask us about that. You could email me and I may or may not be able to help, but the form is really for logistical issues. But I got a bit ahead of myself. The first way to get help is the account quality page. And there's the URL here. It's a pretty simple URL. And this interface is very, it's very simple. It lists the assets that Facebook has flagged as being policy violating, and you can just click appeal, and this will get a re-review. Often this resolves issues right away, and it's very low friction, and I'd encourage it as a first resort. It's probably, it's the first and simplest appeal option, and it's 24/7, right? The teams that monitor these things are global, and so there's always someone assigned to review these kinds of things. And so this is likely to be the most helpful thing when you first start. It will resolve issues often very quickly. But sometimes it still doesn't work. Another thing you can do, and also for different kinds of problems, like not just disapproved ads or something like this, but some other kind of issue that you may experience with an account, is to use the Business Help Center. So here's the URL for this. And basically what this will look like is you can click the page or account that you're having a problem with. It will try to give you lots of help pages, but ultimately there's a button where you can click and ask for help about a particular problem. So, here are some of the options that it adds. It has, like, I think my payment method is restricted, or my ad is pending in review, things like this. And if you click on, a particular issue, you can provide more information and basically start a chat conversation with a human being who can help navigate these issues often. So I certainly know of researchers who have used this successfully. I think one thing to mention is I believe you need something like $1 of spend in the last few months, something like this, in order to access this. So if you don't have that, you may not see this, but it does exist. It's just there's like this minimal gatekeeping that you need a non-zero amount of spend before you can start a conversation with somebody about an ad account, just to manage misuse related issues. Cool. And then the final thing that I wanted to mention, which I'm most excited about because the team I'm on is monitoring it, and this is something that folks on the team I'm on have really pushed for and gotten, is a sort of support channel explicitly and exclusively for academic advertisers, because we've talked to a lot of researchers who've used the typical appeal channels, or for whatever reason couldn't access those channels and we're not able to resolve problems. And we were able to resolve those problems, which is our job, as we support academic partners. So this is a contact form to reach out to folks on the research partnerships team. This is a URL, alias fb.me/academic-ad-support. And I believe this was circulated to the email list a couple of months ago. So this is an alias. So if you use this, there's the actual URL is some series of numbers related to a contact form, which is why we made this alias, because it's a lot easier to keep track of. But basically, if the other channels don't work, or for some reason you can't access these tools, so for example, you're locked out of your account, you can reach out to our team via this form, and we can try our best to help. It's always sort of tricky to figure out how to talk about managing when to use this, right? Because on the one hand, if everyone uses this for every problem, we're both overwhelmed. We're not a huge team. And also, we may not actually be as efficient as some of the scaled options available to all advertisers that are, for example, operating 24/7. But on the other hand, we absolutely want to help you if you're stuck. So use your judgment. And basically, if you're stuck and nothing else seems to work, this is a way to reach out to the folks on the research partnerships team, and we can see if we can find people internally who can help resolve the issue. And we've gotten reasonably good at it. So it's one of the ways that we add value for academics. That's it from me for this part of the talk. I'm very happy to answer any questions. Like I said, you can feel free to reach out by email. And you can also, if you're interested in just hearing from the team more generally that I'm a part of, there's this email address, openresearch@meta.com. The team has a newsletter periodically every few months where we, announce data sets or RFPs or things like this. And so you can email that if you want to hear more. Otherwise, it's been, a pleasure to chat with you all and answer some questions. And I'm excited to answer any more you might have.
Great, thank you so much, Michael. Thanks so much for sharing your experience and giving us these very kind of hands-on practical tips, because I think sometimes, this is what researchers really need. They get stuck somewhere, and it's just like about knowing where to turn to kind of navigate through the platform and the Facebook advertisement manager, which is it is quite intuitive, it's good, but for people starting out, that seems like a big challenge. So thanks so much. We still have a bit of time, so if there's still more questions for Michael now that we have him here and can ask him all these, kind of how do you do this? This is your chance. Do you have any? I mean, you're mostly managing our advertisements, so.
Michael has been very helpful to us. I should first add that one when we got stuck. So I just want to thank him one more time. A thing that I want to add is the study that Anya and I have conducted about political ads. We actually compared. So Michael was talking about whether you should use some political images in your advertisements or not, and you might have different reasons to use political images in your own ads. And of course, if you don't get any permission through CEP, then you will probably be banned unless you choose your political image very carefully in such that the machine doesn't realize it. But in any case, we have seen in our own studies that if you use political images, then your costs will go down. That is for sure. They will be much cheaper than more bland, vague advertisements or advertisements in which you use incentives. But on the other hand, your samples will be very biased. So like people who will opt in your surveys will be people who are very interested in politics, unsurprisingly. Also, our experience was that these people are highly educated compared to general population, male most of the time, and older, tend to be older. So these are things to keep in mind when you choose your own advertisement content and what kind of image you want to use.
Yeah. Well, first of all, of course, very happy to help with issues, and thank you for the sort of social endorsement that the team I'm on is capable of helping researchers. So the other piece of that I wanted to mention is you can think carefully about why it is political, like the ads you're attracting, how they might attract different kind of respondents. Just sort of a broader point of the point that ACUP made. So, for example, if you're interested in attracting particular demographics, and researchers often are, they want a quota sample, they want to get a full set of age, sex cohorts, and often region cohorts, for example, then you should probably use different ad creatives to reflect the different populations you're trying to reach. So if you're particularly, if you need to fill a cell for young women or something like this, then you would use a picture of the demographic that you're interested in getting responses from. This is one kind of thing that at least advertising agencies have suggested. Although I would love to see actual systematic research about costs and things like this, but it's sort of a best practice that people describe. Another thing to mention is if you are, so I know of one paper, I'm unfortunately blanking on the name right now, but it was presented at APSA, and it was about basically they used Facebook ads to recruit right-wing voters in France. And so the language they used was not explicitly political in that sense, but they used a lot of sort of flags and images like this that are not political in the SEEP kind of way, but that tends to attract they were particularly interested in surveying people who have an interest in politics, and a particular allegiance to this kind of nationalist party. And so, these ads attracted those kinds of respondents. And so that's, another thing to keep in mind is that there might be things that are not explicitly political in the sense that they're images of heads of state or something like this, but that tap into similar characteristics as those ads. So again, just kind of thinking carefully about if you're wanting a particular population to engage with your ad, thinking about what kinds of ad creatives might attract those people to take your survey.
There are some questions now. Maybe you can, I can ask and you might answer then. So Lisa is asking, how would you monitor export data on ad performance over time?
So one very common way to do this is using split tests. This is sort of what Facebook is designed for in some ways, is being able to run a lot of different kinds of ads and testing them against each other. If I'm understanding exactly what you mean. So basically there are ways to run experiments within the ads manager, and that's how I would recommend doing that. And you can kind of configure different outcomes. So you might be particularly interested in link clicks, or you might be particularly interested in even taking a survey, and configuring that is somewhat more complicated, but you can certainly, set up using a pixel, what's called the meta pixel conversions outcome, which is people engaging in some behavior that you're interested in, and then monitor whether people, certain ads are achieving conversions at a lower cost than others. So that's how I would recommend that. There are also APIs. I mean, I think most academics are not using the Facebook marketing API and probably have no need to, but certainly like very large advertising agencies use API tools to systematically monitor and modify ad campaigns. So you can look into the marketing API if that's something you might be interested in doing, but the vast majority of academics are just using the graphical interface, and I think that's sufficient for almost all use cases. Next question, what does it mean, your Facebook assets? Oh, that's a great question. And this is one of these cases where I'm just using jargon without realizing it. So here, I mean, things like your pages, for example. So that's an asset that you own. It's tied to your account, and yeah, it's one of your assets. And then your ad account, which is every Facebook user has a personal ad account, and then you can also make additional ad accounts. Sometimes people do this for particular projects. And then there's also a such thing as a business on Facebook, which can be helpful for, well, obviously for businesses, but occasionally academics also use the business structure just to organize their accounts and campaigns. So that would be another example of an asset. And so, you know, for example, when you are using a support option, one of the scaled support options, it often asks you to say what it asks you, what asset are you having a problem with? And you click the page or the business or the account that you're experiencing problems with. So that's what I mean by assets. Have you seen any work on the differences in yield between using targeting by age, gender for same creative versus more specific ad creatives that are used without targeting? I have not seen anything systematic like this, but I think that's a really interesting question. So these are exactly the kinds of things that I would love to see more research about, because I think a lot of people have private knowledge, well, I think they have private knowledge about what works, and may or may not actually, but there would just be, you know, there'd be a huge benefit to just more systematic knowledge about how these kinds of tweaks to different kinds of targeting affect your cost.
Actually, we have a paper on that.
Oh, great. Well, this is the time then. Let us know.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully that's nearly through the review process, so hopefully that will be out soon. But there is a working paper on the webinar series where we really systematically compared even different types of targeting, like single targeting, so just age, just gender, and also cross targeting. So you specify, I want young women that are low educated, what works better, and so on. So maybe we can also put a link to a working paper there. But yeah, targeting, first of all, really important to, depending on what you want, right? So if you want like the hard to reach population, which is, you know, kind of the session you're organizing for Milan, right? Then of course you have to use targeting. But even what we're trying to do of getting relatively balanced samples that, you know, we're aware they're not representative, but we want them to be as close as possible to reflect the populations from where we are, you know, kind of sampling from. And then targeting can really help. So we should definitely, you know, and the cost difference of not using targeting is not that big. So it's not that using targeting suddenly kind of explodes your budget. It's not like this. So it's definitely worth using targets. And then it doesn't matter so much to use cross targeting or single targeting. But what we usually do is we're setting up a lot of, you know, kind of, okay, young people, old people, and so on. And you kind of monitor this in your survey, but it just means that if we use targeting in this way, so one ad for the men, one ad for the women, that there is not this convergence happening with the algorithm where you suddenly end up with only older, very educated men, for example, which is what happens if you just let the algorithm run without targeting. Yeah, but we will put a link to the paper. So yeah, absolutely use targeting. That's the message.
Yeah, just to add, and we have another paper on advertisement content as well. And with, like, in Turkey, for example, we have tried using female as opposed to male photos, you know, to recruit more female or to recruit more male. And we didn't see that much difference. I mean, of course, this might not be generalizable to other countries. We don't know. We have conducted only studies in Turkey and Spain. But in that sense, Facebook's own targeting tools, that is, you know, you just, as Anya has described, creating one ad for women and creating another ad for men, is a much more effective way than recruiting men or women than in our own experiences, creating using different advertisement creatives, like using a female photo or so.
Awesome. Well, you have the best people in the world to answer these questions hosting this, so that's always great. Thanks for sharing the panel or the paper. I will myself check it out.
Yeah, I think there's one more question also by Tren. Would you recommend cost per click optimization or per impression pricing?
Yeah, I know that Stefan, who I'm co-organizing the Milan session with, strongly recommends the cost per click option. I again have not seen, and maybe I'll be corrected again, and I could and Anya have a working paper on this, but I've not seen systematic research about this, but he really recommends the cost per click option. I believe with like brand new ad accounts, often you don't have this functionality. Just as a FYI, it's the kind of thing that you need like a minimal amount of history to be able to access. Not too much, but like you have to have some history of non-violating behavior. But if this is like really important to you and you have and you're blocked, this is the kind of thing you can reach out to me about, either through the form or by email. Let's do the form. It tracks things a lot better. It gets to me. It's very similar to sending me an email, but also gets to other folks on the research partnerships team who can help. And we can see if we can try to help you access that feature. But really, you should just use ads for a bit, and you should get it automatically almost all the time. But yeah, so long story short, the cost per click is what he recommends, and he's done a ton of this. So I would think he knows what he's doing, and I strongly believe that. So that would be my recommendation.
Great. There's a bit of a discussion happening now. Trend kind of coming back about the question of targeting and using multiple ads and so on. So
all right.
Yeah, so is there a risk if we have only one ad that it may not be accepted by Facebook, or it may be not shown, kind of optimal in Facebook ad testing if you choose the cost per click option?
I'm trying to see the question written down. I mean, people do a lot of different things without issue, right? Like some people run one ad creative and just target a bunch of different groups, and that works fine. Some people run a lot of different ad creatives, and that also works fine. I mean, it's really hard to answer these kinds of things abstractly. I'm sure on the margins there are differentials, but like you will still, a lot of people's first experience is that they perceive that they make a lot of mistakes, but ultimately, they field the sample at a reasonable cost, and then they learn for next time. So that as a high level comment, I would just say I wouldn't worry too much about minutia. But as far as things like, one ad versus many ads, this is not particularly important. I mean, what sets how many people see your ad is really budget primarily, the budget that you allocate. And then engagement is a function of many factors, including how interesting your ad creative is, what other advertisers are doing, the population you're trying to reach, and things like this.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then maybe we just wrap it up. Michael, thanks so much for sharing all of this with us, and yeah, it was really helpful just to kind of get your perspective as well. And I think it's great to kind of keep these conversations because it's kind of Meta as the company that offers us the platform to do our research, and we as researchers, there's like kind of, we need that connection, because I think that, and it's great to see that your team exists to build that bridge as well. And so yeah, everyone still in the room or listening to this on YouTube, do feel encouraged to reach out to Michael and his team, to kind of not get our research stuck, and collectively, kind of we gain more and more experience. And this platform here is really about also sharing this experience. So do keep the questions coming and so on.
So well, thank you. if I can, yeah, just thank you for letting me speak. I mean, this has been a real treat. Like I said, this webinar has done so much good for researchers. So I'm really grateful for it. And yeah, also, like Anya said, just feel free to reach out. That's why our team exists. It's to help researchers. So you know, use your judgment, but definitely don't be shy about if you need help or things like this.
Great, thank you. This concludes our little autumn series. We only had 2 sessions this time, but we want to keep it going. So if you have ideas of particular sessions you would like to put on, please do get in touch with Aykut and me, and we're very happy. We kind of want to organize a few more sessions in the spring. So anything that you think you're working on, your experience, and sometimes also just specific applications could be interesting. Do get in touch. We have a big mailing list now with everyone who signed up for the webinars that is on these mailing lists. So if you have particular papers, especially the methods papers that could be of interest for many people, do send us a link so that we can share it, and so on. So let's keep this kind of network idea going here. Yeah, because we do have the feeling that this is helpful for researchers, and that this is what this is for. So thank you, everyone, and hope to see you again in the spring with more sessions. Thank you very much. Thank you.